Hi everyone, this is Veda from Zephyr Lake Carmelite Mission. In the continuation of my series on the Catechism of the Catholic Church, today I'm going to be speaking about the Sacrament of Matrimony. And you can find this in the Catechism in the 1600s, so paragraphs 1600 onwards. Today's topic on marriage is extremely important for the Church. Since the Church has been experiencing tremendous pressure from societal, civil, and legal entities, as well as from entities even within the Church, especially within the ecumenical circles, to redefine the definition of marriage. However, the Church has to stay true to its mission, as Jesus has entrusted this mission of safeguarding the faith and morals to the Church. So the Church has to preserve the moral teaching that marriage is between one man and one woman, and it is until death. So God's divine plan for us as man and woman is for love and to love. And that's the primary purpose of marriage. In this love, the man and woman are by nature and through participation in the Trinitarian life of God, being called to bring new life into existence. In other words, the man and woman are called to be co-creators with God to bring new life into existence. And the parents are given the important responsibility for raising their children to be responsible members of the society, and also for the education of their children, and most importantly, for the education in terms of their moral and faith formation. Marriage is a sacrament of service in the Catholic Church. The couples are called to be at the service of each other, and together they are called to serve their children. And children are called to serve their parents. So family is a domestic church where each person serves and lives for the other. We are called to be a true reflection of the love and the community of the Holy Trinity in the domestic church of the home. Tomorrow we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Trinity, and that's what marriage is supposed to reflect, the marital love between the spouses as well as with the children. Marriage is the symbol of Jesus' love for the Church. Since we Catholics are a sacramental community, our marriage is very different from the civil or legal marriages. Our marriage is not a legal contract. For Catholics, it's a covenant between two individuals who come together in the presence of God. And for that covenant to be a valid sacramental covenant, it has to be one man and one woman for life. God made a covenant with the people of Israel in the Old Covenant, and Jesus perfected and fulfilled it in the New Covenant, and the Church and Jesus are the reflection of the heavenly marriage. The two individuals who are called to the vocation of marriage are called to love one another and to unite and become one flesh, just like Christ and His Church. The couple make a commitment in God's presence which cannot be broken until death. So the union, sacramental union of marriage, is indissoluble. We read in the scripture, Matthew chapter 19, Jesus is very clear that at the time of creation, marriage was between one man and one woman. Although we read in the Old Testament that even some of the leaders of the people of Israel and even the prophets did not adhere to this, and they married several wives. But Jesus says it is because of hardness of heart that Moses allowed divorces, and it's also not the ideal. Jesus is very clear. You can read Matthew chapter 19. However, we know Jesus says that what God has joined, let no man put asunder. So the ideal is one man and one woman, and that's what the church preaches and adheres to. Many marriages is not God's will for humanity. That is very clear from Jesus, who reveals the perfection of the commandments and the laws. He's a fulfillment of the old covenant in the new covenant. So it's a different teaching than what we see in the old covenant. For marriage to be a valid sacrament, it takes place within the liturgical celebration, in the public, in the presence of a priest, and the matrimonial consent is given freely and consciously by the man and the woman to live this covenantal union of love for life. Because marriage itself is a sacrament, it can only be celebrated by baptized men and women. So what happens in mixed marriages? So let's say between Catholic and non-Catholics, between Catholics and non-Christians, how does the church validate or recognize? So if a Catholic is marrying a non-Catholic Christian, then they require permission due to the disparity of religions. The church has to give them the proper permission to have this validity, valid recognition by the church of that marriage. If a Catholic is going to marry a non-Christian, then the church has to provide a proper dispensation prior to the marriage in order for the church to validly recognize this marriage. Even though it's not a sacrament, the church still recognizes the validity of the marriage between a Catholic and a non-Catholic or a non-Christian. In general, marriage itself poses many challenges. Especially in modern times, we see that there is a tremendous increase in the number of people who are divorcing. So as to people from different backgrounds, different religious background, different cultural background, they need to learn to live together in harmony. And in mixed marriages, it causes an even bigger challenge for these couples and their children. And so it must be entered into after careful discernment and prayer. The Sacrament of Matrimony, Jesus gives the couples supernatural graces to live out their marriage vows. So marriage is a microcosm of the love of Christ, the bridegroom, and the church, the bride, lived out in the domestic church of the home of the couple. This sacrament is entered into by the man and the woman, and the grace of God is given to them to love and worship together, and that's what keeps them faithful to their vows until death. The Catechism says, quote, "The Sacrament of Matrimony establishes a perpetual and exclusive bond between the spouses. God himself seals the consent of the spouses. Therefore, a marriage which is ratified and consummated between baptized persons can never be dissolved. Furthermore, this sacrament bestows upon the spouses the grace necessary to attain holiness in their married life and to responsibly accept the gift of children and provide for their education." And another point to note is Catholics do not live together before the sacrament of marriage, and also do not accept civil divorces. If for some reason the couple entered into this union without proper knowledge of the sacrament and its obligations, then the church may grant an annulment of the marriage after reviewing the particular circumstances, and after approval, after review and approval from the tribunal of the church. When faced with difficulties and hardships in marriage, we are called to turn to God and to Christ, especially in the Eucharist, to strengthen us and to help us to discern rightly, and most importantly, to seek the wisdom of the church, found in the good counsel of priests, confessors, in order to make the right decisions. The sacramental community of the church is the best source, and they provide to us direct help from God who provides us wisdom, strength, courage, and the grace, even if necessary, to suffer patiently, to endure hardships, to live out the vows and promises as God would want us. So as a person who has had a divorce myself and an annulment, I know this is not an easy teaching to live up to. However, we are called and we are asked to make a choice. To remain in God's favor, this is the teaching. This is one of the most important teaching that we should live by. To remain in God's kingdom, to understand and to live faithfully the moral teachings of the church, especially in this particular area, is very important. The church cannot go against Jesus' own teachings, clearly recorded in the Gospels by the evangelists. So in order to help the faithful, the church provides pre-Cana catechesis to engaged couples. And this is a common practice around the world to assist the couple who are engaged to understand the characteristics and the properties of the sacrament of marriage. And also this is provided for mixed marriage couples so they can understand the commitment, the responsibilities, the obligations, as well as the characteristics and properties of marriage. This also assists, this pre-Cana program assists the couples to be married to discern if they have a vocation to marriage, a true vocation to marriage, if they're truly called to marry each other. And also there are other lessons given on remaining open to life, on natural family planning and procreation and other such, some practical things as well. In spite of all this, if there are problems and if a couple get a civil divorce, in the eyes of the church, they're still married. In severe abuse situations, the church may permit the couples to live separately, but they still cannot contract a new marriage because a first marriage was sacramental and is until death. If a Catholic unknowingly remarries after their civil divorce, they cannot participate in the sacraments of the church until the time their situation is amended. One such amendment could be that the person and their new partner agree to live a life of chastity and celibacy, even though they may be living under the same roof. Then they may be offered absolution in the sacrament of reconciliation, and the persons could be allowed to participate in Holy Communion and other sacraments. Many blessings are in store for those who once realize what their situation is and who are able to make the sacrifice in order to regain access to the sacraments and to be in full communion with God and with His church. These couples who make this sacrifice will receive tremendous blessings in heaven. In many cases, even though the church makes every effort to catechize couples before they are married, often couples enter into the covenant without full knowledge of their obligations and without full knowledge of the properties of the marriage covenant, the sacramental nature of the covenant. And in some cases, there is even no intent right from the beginning to remain faithful to those sacramental vows. In these instances, after canonical review, the Church makes a judgment as to whether the marriage was valid in the first place. And if the Church decides that it was not, then the Church gives an annulment after the couple have gone through a civil divorce. Now, these individuals who have received an annulment are then allowed to marry again, because a first marriage is considered to be null and void. In my observation, many divorced people fall into this category where they have married or they married in the church, but they didn't have full knowledge of their obligations, didn't have full knowledge of the nature and the characteristics, the properties of marriage covenant, the sacramental nature of the covenant. However, I also observe that most of these people do not approach the church to get an annulment because they either feel they don't know much about the annulment process and this general perception that it's a very long process, it's very expensive, it's complicated. And they also maybe lack confidence in the church's mercy, the merciful aspect of the church. So they usually don't go to the church to have even a review of their marriage and to get their annulment. So the church has been encouraging such couples who have been married more than once to actually approach their local parish priest to discuss their particular situation, to see if there is an opportunity to set them right with the church so they can come back to the sacraments. If one has experienced the bitterness of a divorce, the persons can still live their vocation to their children and even to their former spouse by first of all remaining faithful in prayer for their own salvation and then continuing to serve their children and praying for the salvation of the children and the former spouse. Knowing that one day all families will be reunited in heaven. There will be no broken families in heaven. We can actually apply this saying from Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 22. He's speaking about this in a different context, but I like to apply this to even marriages that are broken on this earth. Jesus said at resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. So I'm counting on this. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says matrimony is not for everyone. It's not an obligation for everyone, especially since God calls some men and women to follow the Lord Jesus in a life of virginity or of celibacy for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. God has a particular plan for each person, and it is the best plan and the perfect plan for their spiritual good as well as for their temporal good. And for all the people who are in their sphere of influence, for the good of those people, the good of them, their salvation as well as their temporal good. Most people are called to the vocation of marriage, but very few are called to a life of perpetual virginity and celibacy. Both men and women can dedicate themselves entirely to Christ, the bridegroom of the church. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1618, we read, from the very beginning of the church, there have been men and women who have renounced the great good of marriage to follow the Lamb wherever he goes, to be intent on the things of the Lord, to seek to please him, and to go out to meet the bridegroom who is coming. Christ himself has invited certain persons to follow him in this way of life, for which or of which he remains the model. Again, the Catechism says that one vocation is not better than the other. So the vocation to religious life and priesthood is not better than the sacrament of matrimony, even though it is more elevated in terms of its resemblance to Christ's own life. Sacrament of matrimony is also an important vocation. It is a calling for each person, and is specific to what is good for that person and for the people who are placed in that person's life. So some people remain single because they have a calling to serve in God's kingdom. But then there are other people, they remain single because they're either widowed or they have had a divorce, they have had an annulment in their marriage. And there may be some people, they tried to get married, but for whatever reason they're single because they never found their marriage partner. It doesn't matter. All of us are still called to lead a life of holiness, regardless of whether the person is single or married or celibate, priest or religious. The gospel calls all of us to a life of holiness in Christ. In Fatima, when Our Lady appeared to the 3 little shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal, she said, many marriages did not please God and were not of God. So this is very important. Marriages are indeed made in heaven, and God has already chosen the person who will be the best spouse for you. He has already chosen the best person who can be a gift to you in this beautiful sacrament of matrimony. So today I'm going to pray for anyone who is looking for a marriage partner, that they find their spouse that God has chosen for them. And the family is a domestic church. The important aspect of marriage is children, and in this domestic church of the family, children learn about God, they form their relationship with God. And I'd like to add here that parents also learn from children sometimes. And parents are the primary educators of the children, and their lives become, the lives of the parents become the primary example that leads and guides their children into ever-deepening knowledge of God, love of God, and a desire to grow close to God. No matter what your family situation may be, by leading a personal, holy life and through prayer and your example, you will fulfill your sacramental obligation. I believe the main goal of service in marriage is to bring the spouse or the ex-spouse and the children of the marriage to heaven, which can be accomplished through the grace of God alone. But what we do is collaborate with God's grace by our own lives of holiness and prayer in every familial situation, including dysfunctional homes, broken homes, and functional homes. We can do this. We can live out our sacramental obligations through a holy life, a life of prayer and good example. Married couples who do not have children of their own because they are unable to have children of their own can still become parents, either by legal adoption or by spiritually adopting children in their faith community, whom they can serve as godparents, religious educators, or even just through their prayer support. In summary, the main aspect of the vocation to marriage is to reflect the Trinitarian aspect of God in this world, and it is to culminate in the physical and spiritual fatherhood and motherhood. So this sacrament is truly a gift from God, and it is about serving the other person. It is about the spouses serving each other, and parents serving their children, children serving their parents, and together they are in service of the faith community and the society. Those blessed by the sacrament have a serious responsibility because they are co-creators with God. They carry out this responsibility reverently and diligently through prayerful discernment of the holy will of God every step of the journey. And that's my reflection for today. I hope you have a blessed day and happy feast of the Holy Trinity tomorrow.